Welcome everybody. This is SF Spark Meetup, and we're on location here at Nitro, where I'm a chief scientist, and at the same time the organizer of SF Spark, which is the new meetup here in San Francisco about Spark, Flink, related technologies, Kafka, Akka, and Mindate is an example of a streaming framework. And today we're very happy to have with us Denis Kulgavin, who is the CEO of Mindate. And one of the creators of the data framework for streaming. And we're very excited to have him present this framework for the first time in a meetup setting at SF Spark today. So first, welcome to Nitro.
Alexy, thanks for having us.
So tell me a little bit about the trajectory which brought you to creation of Mindate.
Yeah, that's a great question. You know, originally we come from a consulting background, and so we built a number of distributed systems for the financial services and ad tech spaces. Almost all of the systems had very low latency, high throughput requirements. And in a lot of cases in the past, we had used Apache Storm. And out of building a lot of solutions on top of Apache Storm, we saw quite a number of areas that we thought were ripe for improvement. And so we ended up building the Mint Data Stream Processing Platform as essentially an extension of the vision that Storm had started to see essentially how we could improve people's efficiency with stream processing.
So in your biography it mentioned that you built various embedded systems which were running on trains and buildings, and these things are sources of streaming data. So I wonder, how did this background affect kind of your career, and in what ways do you see Mindate kind of a result of this embedded systems trajectory?
Yeah, it's funny you mentioned that. So in the late 90s, I worked at a company called Echelon for 5 years. And in those days, it's today what we call IoT, or the Internet of Things. In those days, we called it embedded systems. And we had a lot of the same challenges. We had a very large number of devices. They were always emitting events, and everything was very much event-driven. And so today, when we call things big data and sort of data moving at high velocity, we find ourselves solving similar problems, just at a very different scale. There's more data that's moving around. And so a lot of the ideas for tooling and mechanisms to make people more efficient that we had back at Echelon, I've decided to kind of try to bring forward to the big data space. And so that's where a lot of the ideas behind the Mint Data runtime, as well as the tooling around it, kind of comes from.
It's interesting to see the streaming space evolve. Right, I think Storm was the kind of pioneering framework known to the public. Spark was developed at about the same time, so it added Spark Streaming, which is a different model, which is mini batching. And now we have a new entrant, Apache Flink, which is again streaming first and batch second. So where does Mindate fall on the spectrum, and basically how do you see this whole application space going forward?
Yeah, that's an important point. So I think that it's important for the stream processing platform to take several things into account. So the first part is the stream processing engine. This is an engine that semantically, at a very high level, is similar to Storm. So it has spouts, it has bolts, it has the ability to distribute these things on a cluster. It gives certain messaging guarantees, at least once, at most once, exactly once. So I think all of the engines, including the one at Mint Data that we built from scratch, certainly embody this feature set and functionality. From there, you then start to say, well, if I have a high-performance engine, how do I start to take advantage of it? Because our feeling at Mint Data is that it's not sufficient just to have a high-performance runtime. You actually want to sort of make people more efficient, because people end up contributing to a large portion of the cost at a company. And so if we can make people more efficient, that's really where the importance is. And so at Mint Data, yes, we've built a high-performance runtime. We're happy to show it off. But we've also built a set of tooling that allows you to manage the stream processing designs that we've built out. It allows you to manage the environments on which they run. And on top of that, it actually allows you to build real-time applications for the first time in a point-and-click fashion. And so these are no longer dashboards. Right now, I think that there are a number of solutions out there that sort of help you build dashboards. But dashboards allow you to only have a one-way conversation with your data. They present some information, and at most you can have a filter or two to kind of drill in on it a little bit, but it's very different from having a true, rich, real-time application that can interact with that data set and be hooked up to a high-performance runtime at the same time. And so I think that as time goes on, Mint Data and other real-time stream platform vendors will actually start to provide much more sophisticated tooling that essentially not only allows you to define a stream processing topology, or design as we call it, but also the ability to build real-time streaming applications the same way that BI vendors, a decade or so ago, allowed you in the era of crystal reports to very quickly build forms. I think we're going to see the same kind of powerful, rich tooling get strapped to the high-performance runtimes that we're just seeing evolve today.
Right. I think that now makes it clearer to me why you guys have this beautiful GUI, which is new to me in the case of streaming systems, and generally backend systems are not known for having wonderful GUIs. And I'm wondering, how do you envision your customers? Are they developers? Are they analysts? Basically, who is the target audience of these GUIs, and how do you see your product being used, in industry?
Yeah, so that's a very good question. So there are really three constituencies that we take into account. The first is obviously the business user. So this is the person that's going to be consuming the real-time application. This is really the reason that as developers, we exist in the first place. We're there to really serve the needs of the business. And so the first person that's served is the business user that's going to be consuming the application. The second person is the business analyst or data scientist. It's a number of roles in different companies, but these are the people that are going to use these powerful GUIs to construct these real-time applications, to construct and define the environments in which they run. And then in the case of Mint Data, it's as simple as sharing a link. It's just like a Google Doc, but now you're sharing a true real-time application that's hooked up to a stream processing runtime. That's the second constituency. And the third one is operations. We can't forget operations. Operations are there to make sure that the things that run today won't break tomorrow. And we have to take them into account. We have to give them the same permissions and controls and flexibility to define who can do what, where, and why, with exact visibility into the performance and root cause analysis of performance issues without really leaving them behind. So I think that in the future, stream processing platform vendors really need to take all three people into account. Then user that needs to have a beautiful GUI and they want this built very quickly, the analyst that can construct this quickly, and the operations person that can control and define who has access to it.
Okay, this is great. I think it's really important that you're taking into account all these considerations, and DevOps is a very important component which is often overlooked, right? That's pretty crucial in production. So that's really great to hear that. So I know then you mentioned that your system is built on components, and it was really intriguing when you mentioned that you can actually use Spark as one of these components. And so you primarily develop in Java, and last time we talked about presenting at the meetup, we were Scala shop here. We have huge overlap with Scala. So clearly fans of Scala, and you basically said you guys can do a Scala demo, and you said that you have 100% complete Scala demo. So I'm wondering first, how is it that Spark is a component, because usually it's thought as kind of the nexus of all the other things. So it's very interesting to me that you can use it as a component. And secondly, what were your experiences developing in Scala for this presentation? What are your thoughts on using Scala for kind of end-to-end data pipelines, which is the topic of the upcoming Big Data Scala conference in August? And basically the typical use case for Scala in the big data world now is to write significant pieces of it, including Akka, Kafka, and Spark in Scala. I wonder, what are your experiences?
Yeah, so let me kind of answer that in two parts. So first of all, with Spark, we think Spark is an amazing technology. And actually, I spoke at a meetup a couple of weeks ago, and I gave our developers a challenge. I said, can you integrate Spark onto our platform in one day? And they were able to pull this off, and we were able to present Spark running on the Mint Data platform. It's all because we have a very straightforward componentized architecture. And we think that Spark is an amazing technology. I think a lot of people are going to be familiar with it, especially with IBM's entrance into the space. I think they mentioned that over 1 million people will be eventually trained on Spark and the different transformations and operators. I think Spark has this amazing technology called Catalyst that essentially optimizes SQL queries to run against the data, or essentially with the data frame API has a very sort of high-performance way of taking a logical query plan and physically executing it. And so all of that richness and goodness can exist and does exist on the Mint Data platform, and it took literally just a day to put it on the platform, and we think Spark is here to stay. We think it's going to be a very exciting way to do this. In the case of Mint Data with Spark, either it can run on the Mint Data JVM itself, or we can connect to a faraway Spark cluster. It depends on if you're more in a sort of data exploration mode, or if you're crunching lots of data, you may opt to call out to the Spark cluster. But both modes are literally at the flip of a switch in the Mint Data UI, and you can use Spark at will, and we think it's a great complementary technology. So that's in terms of Spark. In terms of Scala, it's an amazing language. I recall sort of when I was first learning Scala, it was when I was very fascinated with the Kestrel queue that Twitter had built a number of years back. And having built some components for the upcoming presentation today, in Scala, I can say that it's a very expressive, amazing language. And we're excited to sort of welcome the Scala community to the Mint Data platform. It's really a first-class citizen alongside with Java to develop components on the platform.
All right, this is very exciting, and I think we'll wrap up with our traditional questions we ask for, startup founders. Where do you guys envision yourselves in a year? Can you give us some predictions? And definitely we'll have you back then, and we'll check it out.
Yeah, that's a great question. I think we'll see wider adoption of stream processing platforms. I think what you'll see in the future is that today a large number of real-time applications, or what people think of as dashboards, that are built by hand from scratch. I think people will stop building them from scratch, and I think they'll use more powerful tooling to construct those applications, and I think they'll continue to use stream processing runtimes for many years to come.
Wow, okay. And Mint Data itself will hopefully be deployed in multiple setups?
Yeah, so we have a number of customers, quite a number in production. We're looking to actually get this out to a wider audience. But I think the important thing to really keep in mind is that it's all about human efficiency. Whether it's Mint Data or another vendor, we really look forward to a future where the tools that are at our disposal make us more efficient overall. All
right, this is a great prediction, and we'll definitely welcome you back even before that, but certainly that span of time, and see how it pans out. And we're looking forward to your talk.
Great, thank you so much. Thanks for having us.
Thank you.